It's time to begin. This is our final class for today on the Samuel class. We've hit pretty close to 5 chapters every time, and I thought it went pretty well. I don't know what you thought about it, but I thought it went pretty well. We covered a lot of ground and got to see a lot of the stories that are following through. Saw David and Saul, Hannah, Elkanah and Peninnah. If we go back to the very beginning, Saul transitioned from prophets being the main spokespeople for God and leaders for God to them taking kind of a less mentioned approach, and kings taking center stage as it is revealed in 1st and 2nd Samuel. Tonight's class is going to be a little bit, less accommodating for those online, because I'm going to have you guys speak a little more for your gleanings from 1st and 2nd Samuel and things that stuck in your mind and what you really enjoyed, or some things that you've got questions about, or things of interest that you found from these 2 books. Wait till everybody gets kind of situated, and we'll begin after our prayer. Oh, you're fine. All right. Our great God in heaven, we thank you so much that we can be together again, that we have such wonderful capability, such a wonderful family here that works so hard to be united in mind and united together. But we know that this is not something that just happens. It's people that have asked for your help on their hearts. We've all been open to you, Father, and we pray that you continue to keep our eyes opened and our hearts open to you, that you will continue to form us and mold us into your image, that when there's problems among us, they're not even seen as problems. They're just seen as a family that's growing. And we thank you so much that we have such peace among us. We pray, Father, that you continue to imprint upon us the great influence that you have given to us in your word, that through these stories that we read and the knowledge of that these are not simply stories, but it is genuinely history. The people who have given their hearts to you and the people who have disregarded your commands. Help us to be sensitive to these things. Help us to be touched by them, to be more closely drawn to you and more understanding of what you want for us. Help us to not cut corners in our salvation or in our self-examination. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, as we kind of began, we're going to talk about some things that were impressive to us. I'll ask you to speak up as best you can, project out through your mask, and really just remember that there's people online. I'm not saying to shout or do anything uncomfortable that you're not take you outside of your comfort zone too far. But I would like you to share with the class the things that you saw, things that you thought were interesting, or perhaps things that you hadn't seen before even. So with that, and you've got that behind you as kind of a gear turner for your minds, and feel free to speak up and answer one of those questions, or put your thoughts on those ideas. I'll be quiet. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I'll start us off. One of the themes that stood out to me, I guess maybe more so in 2 Samuel, was just the the idea of forgiveness that's found in God and how complete that is. I'm thinking specifically about David, but also that there's still consequences to deal with. And that's probably just on my mind because that's where we ended in 2 Samuel. But it's just, there's so much that David has to deal with.
Yeah.
And yet God is still being faithful, and David is still being faithful to God and through all of that.
Yeah, and that really paints the picture of God and how he is as a father, of how he treats David, who's gone astray into this sin, but he hasn't said, well, I'm sorry, you've done this. Now we can't ever be together again. He stays with him as a loving father would do for his son. Very good observation. Yeah. Go ahead, Jake.
Building on that point, I don't know if it was a theme, but there's a definite example of, God will forgive you and God will be with you, but also your sin has lasting consequences in not only your life, but the lives of those around you. And I think of like Ahithophel. Uriah was his son, and so when David sinned with Bathsheba, his sin not only affected Bathsheba, not only affected Uriah, it also affected Ahithophel, and that also affected the entire nation. And so that one sin affected, domino affected so many things.
Right, there's the ripple effect of sin, that just because you might be the guilty party of the sinfulness, that does not mean, even if you're in your own isolation and nobody's watching you, that does not mean that you are not the only one that's affected by it. Great point in referencing David's sin with Bathsheba, Uriah, and the consequences, the lasting consequences with that as well. Yeah, great observation. And we've all experienced that, haven't we? We've got those scars as recovered sinners. And those people who are still in sin are still, dealing with that. We're going over thoughts and perspectives on 1 and 2 Samuel. So anything that you'd like to add, feel free. Not strictly abiding by what's behind me, but anything that you thought was interesting or theme. Yeah, go ahead, Becky.
I just noticed that you brought this up a lot, but as the people in this story were seeking God, things went well for them when they were getting his counsel before they made decisions that went well for them. And then when you saw them not doing that, when they were just acting out of fear, right now, David and all those mistakes he made right off the bat when Saul started coming after him to kill him, and he lies and eats the bread from the priest, and then he pretends to be mad. He just makes a bunch of bad decisions, and then the next chapter he starts asking God, should I do this? Should I do this? And then he prospers.
Right, that's a great observation, and one of the things that's repeated a few times that I'll summarize with, things went right when David inquired of the Lord. Right, when there was inquiring of the Lord and then it was followed, things went well. But when it wasn't, things did not go well. Okay? Overarching theme about God right there. What's that? What is that? What can we understand about foundational characteristics of God just based on that? When you inquire of God, what?
He makes your path straight. It's a much simpler life. There isn't a whole lot of guesswork.
Yeah. All the answers are already laid out for you, right? When you inquire of the Lord, there they are. But what if he doesn't respond right when you want him to? What's that mean? Well, it means there's no God, right? Not quite. Well, it means he's not listening, right? Not quite. There's something really fundamental about us as beings and being created that as Christians, we jump this reality because we're well past it. God hears. Okay? God hears. And not only that, you remember one of the final Psalms, or maybe even, or there's a few poetry or poetic verses in 1st and 2nd Samuel. You've got Hannah and her song of victory there in the first few chapters, and David towards the end, kind of bookending that, another song of victory, of a deliverance from his enemies. And you remember the imagery that David gives of deliverance. The earth reels and rocks and smoke and darkness as God comes in response to David's seeking him out. Okay? So that's very impressive. You know, we have fathers in this life, be they good or bad, and they've helped us or been detrimental, and they've hurt us, but they don't last forever. God does. He listens, He hears, and He moves. Okay? What else? What else do you see?
I always think of, I did a Bible study with Zach Williams a long time ago when I first moved home, and we studied chapter 21 together.
Uh-huh. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel? 1 Samuel 21?
It's the passage where it's talking about David, and he's got like all these people following him.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about how they're like broken, messed up people. And I always think of evangelism and how when we're looking, everybody's broken.
Right.
But I think that's just encouraging for us today to know that people need the Lord. And those are people that are probably looking for something to follow, to not look for maybe the shiny, happy, perfect people. But
Yeah.
for people that need a solution.
Yeah, it's very difficult often to realize that when we are good, like just across the board, everything's going good, the family's good, I'm a Christian, I have salvation in my hands, my relationship with the Lord is good, and then people see that and that's attractive to them and they're hurting and they want to be around somebody who's not hurting. Has that been your all's experience? I mean, when I've been hurting, I want to be around people that got it together. You know, I want to be around the people who say, Dave, are you doing all right? Because often when I'm hurting, I can't help others who are hurting. Has that been your experience? Because I'm preoccupied about my hurt. And I've got to get my hurt under control. And so I'm going to the people who aren't hurt. Right? Does that make sense? And that draws people. That draws people. Jesus is called the great physician for a reason. All the sick, broken, come to him. Good. Good observations. Anything else? You can go to a completely different avenue of that. Let me totally jump you from the track that we're on. What have you learned about the people involved in 1st and 2nd Samuel? And I'll do a contrast here, because we've talked about contrasts. Get it out there. Lazy S there to the T. You've got Eli and his sons, and then you've got an interesting contrast that's kind of got ... after it. You don't really know what happens with Samuel's sons, but all the people look at Samuel's sons and say what? You just paraphrase. You don't have to say exactly.
We don't want them judging us.
Yeah, we don't like these guys. We don't want them judging us. They're worthless. They're not following you. Samuel doesn't deny it. I thought that was really interesting. God just leaves kind of a sheet over that. Doesn't tell us anymore. Eli and his sons, that story is elaborated on pretty fully, pretty embarrassingly, and pretty violently. What do you think about that and the responsibility of fathers. And if you are wives, let's go ahead and throw this thought in your mind. How would you approach your husband if you couldn't get across to your children that they're going the wrong way, to help him do his part? What do you think? So we've got two sides here. Fathers, husbands, men, what would your approach be to raising your sons if you were either one of them? And then, well, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I don't pretend to have any correct answers here.
You're among friends. No.
If I see my child or one of my children going off a path that they shouldn't go, I think the first thing that maybe we don't see some of these examples, or it's just the awareness of that fact.
Yeah.
That they are going off. And then, how do you bring it up to them so that they don't continue down that path? That's the first thought as a father. You know, how do I bring this up to my child so that they don't just take offense and continue down this path even quicker? So you have to be stern, you have to be upfront, but you have to be in a loving manner, but not it's not an easy situation at all.
No, it is not easy.
Bring it up to your child, but the goal is for them to see the problem, not acknowledge that you told them there's a problem, but for them to see that there's a problem so that then they can want to make a difference. When they're young, you can tell them they're wrong and you expect them to obey and correct, but when they're older, it's not as simple as that, because when they leave you, they need to know how to do right or wrong. So you've got to help steer them back with their own understanding of why they should do this or should not do that. Anyway, that's my attempt at answering your question.
I think that's an excellent response. I'm trying to keep the one thing that you said in my mind. You want your child to be able to see the error and them turn on their own. That is what I would say one of the goals, if not the goal, of parenting. You want them to see both the right and wrong way and choose right, and know why they're choosing right, ideally, or at least grow towards that. Agree to that? I think that's pretty wise. I think that's pretty wise. I think that's exactly what God did with an example I like to use in this parenting wavelength of when he came to Cain, when he offered that unacceptable sacrifice. And so he's mad at his brother because of his own fault. And God comes to him and says, if you do well, will you not be accepted? But what? Watch out. The devil is outside the door, and he is like a lion waiting to devour you. He is wanting you. He is right at the door. What's God saying? They were not in the living room about to walk out the door, and God was right there just standing back as he starts to walk out. He is saying that where your mind is right now, your headspace on this subject and what you're struggling with, I am telling you, the lion is right there. So if you make this choice to do wrong, I am telling you, he's there. Cain does not see it, right? Cain does not see it. He does not take heed. He does not accept that the path that he's going on is going to have grave consequences. And to your point, you want your child to be aware of what's wrong and know why it's wrong, to see the consequences. Okay, great observation. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa. And Benny, did you have your hand up a while back? Sorry, I forgot about that.
Just to kind of dovetail on that, I think it was important for Ben and I to, your kids are going to make wrong decisions, we've made wrong decisions, but I think Ben was really good at showing them that there's always a way back. So you have to like complete that sentence.
Yeah.
Your sin, you're making these wrong decisions, but you have to show them that mistakes are made. That's like never seeing your parents argue. We thought that was a really good thing to do for Morgan or for Emma and Jake, but it's not. It's okay for your kids to see that you disagree and maybe even sin, and then show them how it can go full circle, and go to them and show them the steps to get right with one another. And I think when your kids are making those mistakes, because they're going to, it's not just about preventing them from making, we don't want them to make mistakes, but they will.
Right.
That you show them, because that's the picture of Jesus. There's a way back into a right relationship, and you're not always left on the outside of the door. That's very dangerous for kids.
Yes. Yes, that's an excellent point. Great thoughts. You want the child to see that sin is not the last straw, and then you're cut off. You want them to see that there is forgiveness, there is a way home. Okay, yeah.
I think that just goes right into it. I was thinking, I don't have children, but I have brothers and sisters, and I have like my church family. And I thought about David going, or Nathan going to David
Mm-hmm.
in 2 Samuel 12. And what an awesome picture of restoration that is, and being willing to put your relationship on the line and going out of your way to, save a brother or sister, like pluck them out of the fire, like
Mhm.
what a selfless thing to do. And I think that's incredibly hard and humbling and a scary thought, but definitely something that God calls us to do and applies directly to our life, whether we have kids or not.
Right, that's an excellent point. Nathan, and I'll apply this to, I'm racking my mental reference or concordance. I think it's Galatians 6:1 in that area, where those who are spiritual, who find a brother in sin, who's caught in a sin, caught as in not, haha, I've caught you, but that person, you see them, they're in this rut of this sin, and you're trying to get them out. You're trying to help them out, okay? And a spirit of gentleness coming to them. And that's what Nathan did with David. He comes and provides this excellent approach for David. Evidently, God knew, and whether Nathan, obviously, God and Nathan are in, quote, cahoots to get David to see this, with the hopes of restoration for David, in the sense of letting him see what's wrong so that he can make his heart right from it all. And so he puts in the work, God puts in the work to know David well enough for Nathan to know how to approach David and to tell David this parable of the rich man with the multiple flocks, the poor man with one lamb that is like a daughter to him, and the rich man takes the poor man's ewe lamb, slaughters it for his guests, and Nathan says, well, what do you think should happen in this situation? And he says he should repay however many fold, and what's the rest of it? I want to say says put him to death. But he was adamant about it. I'm forgetting. He was adamant about it, and he was mad. And Nathan said, that's you, what you've done to Uriah, what you've done to Bathsheba, what you've done to God. Okay. It's hard work to come up with a story like that. Yeah.
I think that's interesting, the way that the psychology here you have David who had done some atrocious things just prior. And this is what he's being talked to about. But he thinks he's being talked to about a problem.
Yeah, like it's counsel, like he's coming,
He's
he's giving
king.
counsel. Yeah.
I can solve problems, that's what I do all day, bring it on. So his mind is open, and he listens. Had they told him, hey, David, we want to sit down and talk to you about what you did over here with Bathsheba, immediately he closes his mind off, and if he was like me, he'd close his mind off and not listen.
Right.
But you go to him with a problem that only he can solve, because he's the king, he's
Yeah.
the man, and he's listening, and he's attentive, and he comes up with a solution, and he's distraught, and all these things that and then he finds out it was him. So that's a great example, maybe of, all children are different, but maybe you have a child who's doing something they shouldn't do, and you bring it up to them, they're going to close their mind off. So a good way to perhaps approach it differently.
Yes. Excellent. Excellent thoughts. Oh, yeah, Steve.
I don't know, hitting on a few of these things, that one of the themes that you see is that parenting and that fatherhood and leadership all rolled in together. But like you have on there, raising children, I always object to that phrase, because if you're raising children, you're doing it wrong. You're raising adults, and it's a fine line and a tough road to walk to figure out, okay, what are the mistakes that I can let them make and that I should let them make, and which ones do I need to work harder to protect them from, and
Right.
stuff like that. But I think, we look at Eli and Samuel and their failure, and David and their failures as fathers, but then, if you look out through all of it, God is the father, and he doesn't necessarily have that much better success than those men, and I think that's an important lesson for us.
Yes.
Is that even perfect parenting can land you something non-ideal, something less than what you're looking for. But and some of those things, God says, you know what? This is a mistake I can let you make, having a king, and he lets them. But to see how those things are done, and to get to the point where you can let your children make mistakes, learn from them, get better, or eventually, so at some points, even just say, that's them, not me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another excellent observation of when we put too much stock in our ownership of raising adults or developing children. Can we say that? Of helping our children see how good it is to be part and become a part of the image of God. Dash, 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 dash. The reality is God has allowed us to have a choice, either to obey or disobey. And our children have the ability of choice to obey or disobey, and they're responsible for their own actions, and we're responsible for our own actions. So it comes to a point of where we have to step back from the ownership of this is a good child or this is a bad child, but this is a product of a person who has taken in this wisdom and taken in this insight, to borrow from Proverbs, and has come to the knowledge of God on from what they've been taught, either from me, their mother, their siblings, their extended family, their brethren, or whatever. We're all in this world together. We all have the influences that are around us, and we're all seeking, hopefully, the right goals to, as Morgan said, to understand that we are a family. Like, it always puts a light on in my head when, like, Morgan or someone else who doesn't have her own children right now says that I don't have children, and yet your influence extends to my children, to my nieces and nephews, to your nieces and nephews, and to the friends of this group, of this family. The ownership, the responsibility is on all of our shoulders to maintain the family of God in this area. And that's why I think we are working so well together, because we understand that. When there's a conflict, we're sensitive to it. We're not saying, squish the conflict. Go ahead, Benny.
And not to take away from what you're saying, because studying 1st and 2nd Samuel in the past, I don't know why this time with this study, it stuck out so much
All right.
with me. And it's just, different times in our lives, different things, different application, where maybe like you would think that, like for me, this would be about raising my children. But I just really am just still like so stuck in 1 Samuel, the relationship of Jonathan and David.
Yeah.
They're
Man, that's great that you pulled that up.
Relationship, not together, not by blood, but their friendship, their covenant. And then kind of going along with like what you're saying about family here, we're not all related by blood, but the covenant we've made, to be in agreement and love each other, and just, again, just not related by blood, but how we oversee and, take care of each other's children, and we're in each other's homes, and we're so much a part of our lives. I don't know, just something about that relationship just really right now in my life just really just sticks out about how strong they were together. I think about like Sarah Gershenson, how she doesn't have anybody here, other than Mike, her husband, but she doesn't have anybody here by blood in St. Louis. And just how, we've come to love her, and just, I don't know, just something about that.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing, and it's God-given. When you're among Christians, there's no need for a long background of time together to have a relationship like we have already. It's just amazing, because it's family again when you go worship somewhere else. Go ahead.
Along those same lines, one thing I've noticed a lot of people in our group, including Morgan, they take the responsibility of training our children to be servants. So, like if you look at Hannah in 1 Samuel, and she approaches motherhood as, when she does get a son, her goal is to give him to God. And you see Eli, and he's reprimanded for giving them, kind of taking the best of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So his sons are kind of, it looks like, raised not to serve, but to get the best of what others are giving. And so you see a big contrast. And so how that translates to our responsibility and the purpose of us raising our own kids and friends' kids, and
Excellent observation. The idea of Eli's children being what you might almost say conditioned to the best, to have the best, and then Hannah building her son to be given to God, or making that resolution before he's even born, right? That this stake in the ground, my son's devoted to the Lord, period. And I will do whatever it takes to do that. You say that sternly, but there's also that surrounded softness with knowing how to raise that child. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
I was thinking for a while about how to sort of try to summarize the differences between Saul and David, because there seems to be such a contrast between sort of the people's chosen king and God's chosen king, and there's probably a lot of dimensions you could take it, but the one that I was thinking of was one was able to wait on the Lord and one wasn't. So, for instance, David has this very long time in his life where he knows he's going to be king, and yet he's on the run, and his life is so difficult throughout kind of 1 Samuel, maybe 20 through the end of the book. And Saul, meanwhile, as soon as things start to go sideways with him a little bit in chapter 13, and he sees the enemy and he doesn't know what to do, and he doesn't see Samuel, he takes matters into his own hands. And I think that difference of what do we do when we feel overwhelmed, who do we turn to, do we try to make it happen ourselves, is a big lesson from the book.
That's another, man, you guys are killing it tonight. This is great. Observing Saul and David and the contrast and how David's able to wait for the most part. And Saul, once things get, what I would describe as once his faith gets stretched, he decides to not have it anymore. Not waiting on Samuel. As Adam references 1 Samuel 13, not waiting for Samuel to come, but going and offering the sacrifice himself, which was not his to offer. Okay? Remember a phrase in there, but I thought, seemed like the right thing to do because of this. I'm justifying myself because this is the evidence of why I'm doing this, and it is what I thought would be good. You know? Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
Along with that, something that I've just been thinking about this whole time is that we are not blindly waiting. I just think I'm thinking a lot about this because of last week, but David's song of deliverance, God moved constantly. He was never wavering. Obviously, he let them fail, but that was to show him that they needed to have complete dependence on them. So there was always a reason, but he never was lacking in the way that he moved for them. And so I think a theme for me through 1 and 2 Samuel is David had every reason to be a man of God because God showed him his character. Through every trial, through every battle, it was never a question, like Morgan said. Like, it was never a question of whether God was going to move for his people. He did. It was just a matter of whether they were going to move for him. And so I think that has just been something big. It's like, we don't have to move forward in strides with our own, strength, because we can see that God moves for us. We just have to let him.
Excellent observation. One of the things that I thought really stuck out to me in what you're saying was that God revealed himself through trials, not through blessings for David. It was the trials, it was a struggle. David hung in there. He hung in there. He ran and he ran and he ran, one step away from death, right, is how he described it. And he did not put his hand out to destroy the Lord's anointed. Okay, very sensitive to God's choosing of who's in charge. He respected the office, is one way that you could say it. Respected that position because God had put him there. And he paid for it by having his faith stretched and stretched and stretched and running for his life. And his faith is built and built and built and built because God continued to move to deliver. Excellent. Okay, any other characters that stick out for you, from the text that you might not have seen before? Benny talked about the relationship of David and Jonathan. Jonathan being the main person in that relationship that's being described as his soul being knit to David, covenanting with David, becoming more than a family member to David, as he's devoted to what is right as opposed to his own father who is wrong. Any other people you thought that you found impressive here? Abigail, man, yeah. Why hasn't she come up yet? What's so impressive about her?
How she displays like the Christ-like willingness to mediate and take the cost of someone else's sin to make the situation right.
Yeah, she's taking the cost of someone else's sin, namely her husband's sin. She says, "May all the guilt be on me," humbling herself to David, understanding that her husband is, as his name is, a worthless man. Okay? And she does not say that in a way to demean him. She is identifying his character. And David already knows that. It also shows us an example of her Christ-like characteristics of being so intent on doing what is right despite being surrounded by wrong. Okay, her husband was the keeper of the keys, per se, would not allow these things to go out to David and his people, but Abigail made sure that it happened. She talked with the servants and had a relationship with the servants so well that they felt they could come to her and mitigate this entire destructive pursuit that David was on with his men. Okay, excellent observation. Who else? Elkanah?
Got a better one.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know if go over as well, and people may have different views on this. But I think of Joab, David's military leader.
Yeah.
So on different situations, he had to get David back in line. And,
Very true.
Called him out in situations like with his own son. Like, you're going to make bad decisions because you're letting emotions get in the way of what you should be doing. And also, when the kings were to go to war, I have the exact example in front of me right now, David chose to stay back, and what was he doing? And Joab said, well, I'm going to name the city after myself. If you're not, I don't know if that's sarcasm, I took it that way, you might take it different ways, but that's how I took it. You don't get out here, I'm claiming the city for myself.
Right, Joab, or you had, was that your concluding remark? Okay, sorry, I jumped right in after that. I'm watching my time here. Jay is talking about Joab as the commander of David's army, pulling him out of the fire a couple of times, trying to, in instances, trying to get him to see, hey, I'm going to conquer this city. I'm not the one, which I take it as he's not being sarcastic. I think he's doing David a favor and saying, this is, cause and consequence. If I take the city, it's named after the conqueror, so I'm going to conquer it, but I don't want that to happen. Get up, get out here, and conquer the city as a king should. Last time you stayed home when all the other kings went to war, how'd that play out? Not good. That's where he saw Bathsheba, and the rest was history for that. And then during the census in the last chapter, chapter 24 of 2 Samuel, Joab says, what is wrong with you in wanting to take this census? This is not a good pursuit. But David pressed him and pressed him and pressed him, and he said, okay. 9 months they go out from Dan to Beersheba on each side of the coasts of the boundaries of Israel. He does it, and then bang, David's heart strikes him. God gives him the choices. Hey, this is the consequence. You can do A, B, C. David says, I see my sin. I throw myself at your mercy. And God says, okay, this is the plague. It's going to kill, 70,000 people, all scattered throughout the area of Israel. What a pandemic. Okay? And couldn't get David to see that it was wrong. But of course, in that text, God says he had incited David to do this against the people of Israel, But the burden was on the leader that carried it out. Thought that was interesting. It's like, well, how does that play out? I don't like that. I don't want to be that guy that sins so that you could do something else to this person. But it's what it is. Okay. Thank you so much for allowing me to lead these studies. I thank you so much, especially for your participation this evening. It's thrilling to me to hear how excited you are and the things that you've learned and the things that have stood out to you. So I think study Joshua for the next Wednesday. I think Ed's going to start that class coming up, and hope you'll be able to give that same effort that you've given to me in participation and enjoyment. Mm-hmm.